Hi, BookTube. So I've seen a lot of these videos around. It was started by Climbthestacks, followed by quite a few other people, and I've watched a whole bunch of them, and I've enjoyed them, and it got me thinking about my own reading history. And so I just thought I'd share. Reading has always been a part of my life, and you'll see that throughout my discussion here, my reading history. I don't remember when I first started reading, but my mom has told me. She used to read a lot of like the Dr. Seuss books and all the typical children's books to me when I was younger. Until I was 2, and then I became very independent, very independent. My favorite thing to say was, me do, go away mommy, I can do it myself. And that started with reading at the age of 2. Pushed my mom aside, I'm like, I'm reading One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. You don't need to do this. And I've always been a very independent reader. I can't remember my parents reading to me because I can't remember when I was 2 or 3 years old. There's only one exception to that. When I was in elementary school and my dad read Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase to me at night. Yeah, that was the only book my parents ever read to me. I'm not saying they're bad parents, because I was very independent and I said, no, you're not going to do this. I'm going to. When I started going to school, I was always bringing books home. I remember in kindergarten, they had the different levels of reading, and you could take a book home, and I knew I was at the highest reading level because I'd been reading forever, and so I just started pulling all the books off. I'm like, I don't care if it's a level 2, I want to bring it home and read it anyways. And doing that in elementary school too. One of my favorite books was The Stinky Cheeseman and Other Stories. Can't really remember too many other picture books, but definitely Dr. Seuss a lot. Elementary school, 2nd grade is when we had an indoor recess one time, either because of rain or snow, I can't really remember, but our teacher told us to lie down, and she turned off the lights, and she read us the first 3 Boxcar Children novels over a period of months, obviously. And I was caught. This is it. You've infected me with this bookworm. I have to read. So, you know, I was reading The Babysitter's Club, which were big at the time. Roald Dahl. I could read all his books in a day, in one sitting. Some of my favorite books from that time period were The Root Cellar by Janet Lunn, which is a beautiful historical fiction of a young girl who goes back in time to the American Civil War, I believe it was. Or it was either the Civil War or the War of Independence. I can't quite remember. And Dinah and the Green Fat Kingdom. And those are still 2 of my favorite books. Also, The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle. Those typical middle school books that, you know, people read. And it was just, you know, always there, always reading. Grade 8 is when I was introduced to kind of classics. We read Anne Frank, The Outsiders. I can't remember too many more, but that's when I really started getting interested in these books that you should read. You know, we have this idea of classics that you should read. And, you know, I was, at that time, I just took reading for granted. It was just something I did. You know, I was actually really into science at the time, and I was expecting at grade 8, during the graduation, to get the science award. And when I got the English award, I just kind of went, oh, well, you know, I love reading. Like, I panicked in science because I always had to study, and I, you know, always had to try and understand it. Whereas reading, it was just, came naturally to me. And it was at that time that I went to the library and I got an abridged copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. It was, you know, just kind of sounded interesting to me, and I picked it up and I read it and I was like, this is amazing! Like, this is stuff I want to read. And then I went on eventually to read the full text, and it's my all-time favorite book. I'm actually rereading it right now. I was also into a lot of fantasy at the time. I can't remember too much of what I started with fantasy, but it was just always there. And at this time too, my aunt started giving me all her used books. She's not a hoarder like I am with books. When she's done reading something, she likes to give it away, and I like accepting books, and that's where I found Harry Potter. And of course everyone knows Harry Potter, and I eventually read the first 3 just kind of casually, and then from the 4th book to the 7th book was the whole midnight premieres of the movies and the midnight releases of the books and the parties and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, then I went to high school, and these teachers were amazing. My English teachers were absolutely amazing at introducing books and having you love them, and I decided to take all possible English classes. I said, forget science, forget math, I'm taking every English course I can. And I did. So some of my favorites from high school, I love Wuthering Heights, Lord of the Flies, Frankenstein, Hamlet. That's when I took an independent literature course, and we started reading Brave New World, The Little Prince, Peter Pan, 1984, we read the Bible, Chaucer, and started really exploring all these other classic literature. It was at that point that I became a book snob. I was not going to read anything that was published before 1950. I said all those books published after that time are pish-posh nonsense, not worth my time, and I would look down on people who were reading this. So I'd get introduced to a lot of people as a reader, and they're like, oh, have you heard of this person? I'm just like, I only read classics. I was such a book snob. But then I went to university. I had no doubt about my major. I was going to study English. I've wanted to be a teacher for as long as I can remember. So I pursued that. I was going to be an English teacher, obviously. So that's where I started kind of going out of my comfort zone of the classics. And I started taking really interesting courses that I would never have taken in high school, kind of stuff. So I took gay male literature. I took a course that was all about James Joyce, all about Edgar Allan Poe, Shakespeare. I took an African drama course, which was really cool. Medieval poetry, literary theory kind of opened me up to more literary fiction and stuff that was published after 1950, more recently published items. Canadian literature really accelerated my love of Canadian literature. You can see the beginning of my Canadian literature here, and it was just amazing. I loved university. It was also the first time where I wasn't going to school where I had friends, and I wasn't really good at making friends, so I just started reading all the time. So it was, coursework for my program, and then whatever I was reading at the time, which was still a lot of classics. And then the Harry Potter throughout there, right? And then I discovered science fiction. I was sitting in the common room, in the dorm room, and flicking through the channels, and this show was on called Stargate Atlantis. And I was like, whatever, you know, I'll watch it. And that threw me into my love of science fiction. Science fiction everything. I'm talking TV, movies, and books. So I went online, I was like, I gotta read all the, you know, the great science fiction novels, and I discovered Douglas Adams and Arthur C. Clarke and just all the science fiction greats. And I read a lot of science fiction and classics at that time, and it was really not until I discovered BookTube that I really got into literary fiction. It was still quite a small portion of my shelf. I'd read occasional ones, but I was still really into classics. And science fiction and fantasy. I hear a lot of people, friends that I talk to, who said they, you know, going to university actually destroyed reading for them because they didn't like the whole analyzing process. And actually I think that adds to my enjoyment of books. I love, you know, when half the book is an appendix, kind of like with Ulysses by James Joyce. It's gonna sound kind of snobby and bragging, but you feel smarter when you get the references and you know what's going on. You can analyze it and bring this whole other aspect of the novel out instead of just, you know, the words on the page and the plot and the characters. You get a whole lot more out of it, I think. It was during university that I began collecting books, going to garage sales and thrift stores, finding books on the side of the street that were marked free, and you know, I still don't really have a lot of newer books. That's a lot of the places where I get books, and even in bookstores, the classics were usually like the 3 for $5 or 3 for $10 that I'd pick up. So that's where the majority of my collection comes from, are used books from all these different sources. And now I have books in 3 different locations, because there's some at my dad's house, some here where my mom and I live, and some at our trailer. Just until recently, I had bags of books in the back of my car. They're everywhere. And, you know, I laugh when people suggest that I should start getting rid of stuff. And it's just like, no, like, I may not read all of these books, but it's there. It's a potential for me to read these books, to look at them and see potential journeys, and to see hope and all these things in these wonderful books, and to see old favorites and memories. And it's wonderful to have this visual representation of who I am, you know, books. I was a bit of a slower reader. I'd read 1 or 2 books a month. And then one day, I was really into watching room tours. Don't ask why. I'm really into interior decorating and everything. And then, I stumbled across a bookshelf tour, and I was like, people put bookshelf tours up on BookTube, on YouTube. And, then I discovered the bookshelf scavenger hunt that was started by, I think it's Library of Sarah, and that's when I discovered BookTube. But there were people who were dedicating themselves to reading books and making videos about them, and that's when I really started bumping up my books to, you know, 4 or 5 books a month, which is a lot for me. Yeah. I know a lot of other people said they had a lot of reading slumps periods in their lives when they weren't reading, reading on their own, like reading for school still, but not on their own. But there's never been a time where I have not been reading. I do have reading slumps that maybe last for a few weeks or such, but I still am always reading, starting books, putting them down, that kind of stuff. So yes. And still to this day, I'm reading, I'm collecting, I'm writing, I'm talking about books on the internet. It's just wonderful. Books are my life. I love books and reading and all that stuff, and I really enjoyed sharing my history with you, and I'm gonna shut up because this video is already 15 minutes long. So let me know your reading history. I am really intrigued at hearing people's memories and their favorite books and all that kind of stuff. And remember to keep on reading.